afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the training, Building the Case for Green Infrastructure, the Value of Nature, brought to you by Mass Audubon on behalf of the SNEP Network. My name is Leah Soloway, and I'm a policy assistant with the New England Environmental Finance Center and a member of the SNEP Network. The Southeast New England Network is a collaborative group of technical assistance and training experts based in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, with a focus on how to finance and implement stormwater and watershed management efforts. The network is supported by EPA Region 1 with a far-sighted vision to build resilient ecosystems and connect communities through action, collaboration, and innovation. The network's mission is to empower communities by building local capacity to achieve healthy watersheds, sustainable financing, and long-term climate resilience through stormwater and ecological restoration projects. To learn more about or request network services, SNEP communities can visit our online portal on the SNEP Network website and fill out the request form for technical assistance. You can also contact our two state liaisons, Kimberly Groff for Massachusetts and Elizabeth Scott for Rhode Island, with any questions related to the SNEP Network assistance, or visit our website at snepnetwork.org. Before we begin the presentation, I want to draw your attention to the GoToWebinar questions dialog box. Please type in your questions at any time during the webinar. My colleague Tess Clark at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center will be monitoring the questions. There will be a question and answer discussion at the end of the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Paige Dolce. Paige is Mass Audubon's Central Metro West Regional Coordinator for the Shaping the Future of Your Community program. Her primary role is performing outreach and providing technical assistance to municipalities with high rates of development in support of sustainable planning and nature-based solutions for climate resilience. Through previous roles like TerraCorp's Land Stewardship Coordinator with Sudbury Valley Trustees, she has experience engaging local communities and organizations on topics like space, open space protection, and urban pollinator habitat. Paige studied environmental science and policy at Boston University. And thank you so much, Paige, for being here today. And I will hand things over to you to begin our presentation today.
Okay, thanks, Leah. Here. Okay, so thanks for that introduction, Leah. That was great. My name is Paige Dolce. I'm the Central Metro West Regional Coordinator for the Shaping the Future of Your Community program. So as Leah mentioned, with the Shaping program, I mainly perform outreach on sustainable planning and development and climate resilience using nature. So we work in the fastest developing communities in Massachusetts, which includes Metro West and Central Massachusetts, where I'm focused. And then we also have a regional coordinator in Southeast region as well. And we provide customized workshops, technical assistance, and planning advice for municipalities. So I know the SNEP Network recently held a webinar on green infrastructure to introduce the topic, which are available online. So we define green infrastructure as natural features or engineered structures that mimic these natural features that perform critical natural processes that benefit humans and wildlife. So these processes include managing surface and groundwater flows, capturing and treating stormwater, protecting water and air quality, providing climate resilience benefits, and protecting public health. So the terms green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, and LID, low impact development, are closely related and sometimes can be used interchangeably and can be confused. So how we put it is that nature-based solutions and low impact development, LID, are actions or strategies that protect, restore, and or manage green infrastructure. So another way to look at green infrastructure is this, with low impact development being defined as a type of nature-based solution. So the other two types of nature-based solutions that we identify are open space preservation and ecosystem restoration. So all of these nature-based solution types help us address hazards including riverine flooding, coastal erosion, stormwater flooding, and heat island effects in more urban areas. And these all provide co-benefits, including avoided cost, enhanced safety, and environmental services like clean air and water. Okay, so an introduction to the project that Mass Audubon worked on. So the idea that natural areas have economic benefits is well documented, but it's not yet used at the forefront of outreach like it could be. So many decision makers locally and in the state continue to look at conserved land as being in opposition to community development instead of supporting it. So I'm going to speak on the project Mass Audubon has been working on first, and then I'll discuss other resources that can be used to communicate the value of nature to stakeholders from some of our partners. So an intro to the Narragansett Bay watershed, which is where this project was focused. It is home to about 2 million people. 60% of the watershed is located in Massachusetts and 40% in Rhode Island. So the inspiration for this project, or one of them, was the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program's State of the Narragansett Bay and its Watershed Report from 2017. So the report found that there were dramatic reductions in pollution thanks to upgrades in wastewater treatment facilities over the last 15 years, roughly. Now, however, there are other challenges like addressing pollution sources like runoff from paved surfaces and septic systems, protecting natural lands, and adapting to climate change. Okay, so the big idea behind this project was to better understand the value of nature and to support the economic case for green infrastructure. So there were 3 phases to this project. First, colleagues at the University of Rhode Island conducted a meta-analysis of economic sectors in the Narragansett Bay watershed and their relationship to natural resources in the watershed. Secondly, colleagues from the Natural Capital Project at Stanford University conducted a watershed scale modeling of land use's effect on water quality and residents' willingness to pay for water quality improvements in the Bay from 2001 to 2011. And then third, Mass Audubon's role. So our team conducted a literature review of ecosystem services studies relevant to New England, and we compiled key facts and figures from this review into a set of 5 fact sheets. Okay, and then a very high-level overview of the Narragansett Bay Watershed Economy Project. So you can find this full report, an executive summary, and more information on nbweconomy.org. So they found that economic values of 13 sectors in the Narragansett Bay watershed, most of which are underpinned by healthy natural resources, was responsible for $14+ billion in revenue and expenditure and 97,000 plus full and part-time jobs. The report also gets into future threats for each of these sectors, which especially are climate change and land development. So this is a breakout of the different sectors and how they contribute to revenue and employment. So as you can see, tourism is by far the single largest contributor to revenue and employment in the Narragansett Bay watershed, followed by the defense industry, which is especially vulnerable to rising sea level, and forestry. So here is an example of what the forestry section of the report looks like and some of the facts and figures that you'll see laid out for each sector. So it lays it out with stats from Rhode Island and Massachusetts, so it covers each state in the watershed. So here we see that extractive forestry generates millions in sales, so the sale of forest-based products in the Rhode Island portion of the Narragansett Bay watershed generated almost 500 million in 2013, and it accounted for 3,000 jobs and with 55 million in wages total. And then the major outputs included are shown in this graph, with paper manufacturing being number 1. Okay, and then this is moving on to Stanford University's Natural Capital Project and the work they did for this project. So the main finding for their published report was that wastewater treatment upgrades provide a high value to residents in the Narragansett Bay watershed. So residents are willing to pay a total of $38 million and $51 million per year for recent wastewater treatment upgrades in the Lower Bay and Upper Bay, respectively. So I mentioned these wastewater treatment upgrades when I was talking about the watershed and the Narragansett Bay Estuary Programs report that showed that there were great improvements. So this study tried to put a value on those improvements. And as you can see, they split up the area into 2 different regions, Zone 1 and Zone 2, just based on different oceanographic conditions. So this is a very heavy, content-heavy paper, and I could spend a whole presentation just talking about this. But on our website, the link is on the bottom, massaudubon.org/value of nature, we have a fact sheet just on this section of the project, which goes into much more detail about the methodology and more results besides just the willingness to pay finding. Okay, and then moving on to Mass Audubon's role. So Mass Audubon has compiled a very large list of ecosystem services literature. It's about 200 resources long. And then from this, we worked with ERG, or Eastern Research Group, which is a consulting firm, to pull some of the most compelling studies and or studies that would fit well in a filterable database. So this ended up being 54 ecosystem service valuation studies and 92 discrete ecosystem services values. And then on the right, you just see this graph that kind of lays out what we found in our literature review. And this is pointing out the type of ecosystem providing the service that came up the most. And it was by far wetlands, followed by multiple ecosystems. So that could have been forests, wetlands, green space, forests, and then green space alone. And this inside SNP, outside SNP is just whether it was in Massachusetts and Rhode Island or outside of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But we still tried to keep all of the studies relevant to New England, at least. So studies came from Rob Johnston at Clark University, Emma Uchida at University of Rhode Island, who led the Narragansett Bay Watershed Economy Report, Tufts University, and searches of academic databases by Mass Audubon and ERG. Okay, and then this is just another look at what we found in the literature review, this time looking at ecosystem service measured. So we found that recreation came up a ton, flood reduction a ton. What we found less information on was groundwater recharge and the benefits or the value of habitat, for example. And these graphs are just looking at the smaller subset of research, the 54 studies, but the large review of 200 studies, we found similar things. That recreation came up a ton and habitat, for example, not so much. Okay, and then here is just a screenshot of a small part of the database, which is available again on the Value of Nature website in full. So the database provides info on the ecosystem providing the service, the ecosystem service measured in the study, so flood reduction, groundwater recharge, etc., the study area, the actual value of the service in dollars, and the methodology that the paper used for calculating it. Okay, so as I said, a smaller set of literature was included in the database that I just described, but we pulled facts and figures from many more of the 200 resources to develop a set of 5 fact sheets on the value of nature. So these are our value of nature fact sheets, again, available on our website. So we split these up into ecosystem type. So forests, coastal, wetlands and waterways, grasslands and farmland, and lastly, urban green space. So we intended for these fact sheets to be used either as a set or as individual fact sheets, depending on the audience's interests. So for example, when I'm presenting to a watershed group or a river council, I would pull from the wetlands and waterways fact sheet. And we primarily discuss the benefits of nature for people, but we also provide stats on the importance of these ecosystems to wildlife of the greatest conservation need in Massachusetts. And we also try to have local community spotlights in each of the fact sheets, since some of the stats will come from New England as a whole or the US as a whole. We wanted to provide sort of mini case studies in each of them. Each fact sheet also has a few blurbs on the impact that climate change and development is having on these ecosystems. So these are two-sided, so on the back you'll see some of that. And these have also been provided as downloads, so you can see them currently. Okay, and then for the most part, the services we include are consistent across all 5 fact sheets. So clean air and water, carbon capture and storage, climate resilience, economic and health benefits, and recreation and tourism. Okay, so I wanted to give you just some examples of some of the stats you'll see in these fact sheets. I just pulled from 3 out of the 5. But this is the forest fact sheet, and you'll see we have a section on urban forests in particular, and a study on 15 communities of Metro West Boston alone, or Metro Boston alone. These urban forests remove 1.75 million pounds of air pollutants annually, worth 11 million. They also store 962,000 tons of carbon, worth 125 million, and they help the communities in Metro Boston avoid 527 million gallons of stormwater runoff every year, which is worth annually 4.7 million. Economic and health, thanks to their air filtration function, New England's forests provide health benefits like reductions in respiratory illness, asthma, hospitalization, valuing about 550 million per year. And then lastly, this is an example taken from the carbon capture and storage section. So about 7% of Massachusetts' annual carbon emissions are absorbed by our 3 million acres of forests, and the average acre stores about 103 tons of carbon. And in this fact sheet, there are also stats on water filtration, forestry, flood mitigation, and the value of forests to indigenous populations. Okay, and then another example, the grasslands and farmlands fact sheet. So start with economic and health. We talk about how community gardens can increase community cohesion, connect people with nature, and provide accessible, healthy food for everyone. They're also quite important in stormwater management, so co-benefits. Pollinators contribute about 24 billion to the US economy. So this is an example of a US-wide stat that we have in some fact sheets. Next, climate resilience. So here we focused on climate change and it threatening our ability to produce food. And food insecurity is already present in Massachusetts. So there's a $2.4 billion potential savings per year in medical treatment costs by addressing food security in Massachusetts, so addressing the actual issue. And then over 200 million is the benefit to participants in Massachusetts HIP program in the first 7 months. And this demonstrates demand for healthy local food because HIP makes buying fruits and vegetables from farmers markets and other qualified local vendors more cost-effective for low-income residents. And then the Green City Growers section on the left is an example of a community spotlight. So Green City Growers is an organization that converts unused spaces into urban farms, and it's grown more than 175,000 pounds of organic produce over less than 2 acres. So based on this, it's estimated that just 1.6% of Boston's 57,000 roughly acres of land would be needed to meet the needs of at-risk Bostonians. Okay, and then lastly, I wanted to pull some stats from our urban green space fact sheet, which is number 5. So here we start off by talking about how the value of green space and trees in cities can be overlooked, but shouldn't. Urban green space provides many services, and it's important to ensure that our most vulnerable communities have fair access to all of these benefits. So starting with economic health and going off of that, marginalized and low-income urban communities are often farther away from green space and more negatively impacted by the urban heat island effect and by air pollution. Low-income communities are also more likely to be exposed to climate change threats like flooding, storms, and droughts due to inadequate housing and infrastructure. And in economic and health, we also have some stats on air pollution and stormwater. So we saw a 50% reduction in indoor coarse particulate matter concentrations thanks to roadside street trees impacts on neighboring houses. And then another study found that a single tree lowered concentrations behind it by 15%. And then on the right, 85% reduction in surface runoff entering a pond in Providence, Rhode Island, thanks to their use of low impact development, which we discussed. The practice also reduced phosphorus pollution by 95%. And then on the left, an example from the carbon capture and storage section. So $166 annual value per acre of fully vegetated green infrastructure is the expected benefit in reduced CO2 emissions thanks to New York City's Green Infrastructure Plan. So this fact sheet naturally focuses a lot on human health, both mental and physical. It also features stats on electricity cost savings thanks to tree planting, urban green spaces' important role in global climate resilience, and it describes the role of green space as a stepping stone between larger natural areas for wildlife, because given climate change, several species of wildlife will need to move in order to adapt to the changing climate. So urban green spaces help facilitate that. Okay. So information from this project was included in the 6th edition of Mass Audubon's Losing Ground series. So this report comments on the pace and pattern of land protection and development in Massachusetts. So overall, we found that the pace of land development has stayed about the same as in the last edition, ticking up just slightly from 13 acres to 13.5 acres. However, the pace of land conservation has increased significantly from about 40 acres per day to 55 acres per day. This is an important accomplishment, but we are seeing a new form of land development that's having significant impacts, and that's large-scale ground-mounted solar arrays. So this report found that about 1/4 of new development was attributed to ground-mounted solar. Okay, and now I'm going to move on to some other resources we can use to communicate the value of nature and its more intrinsic benefits as well. So the first resource is from Mass Audubon again. It's a set of 5 low-impact development fact sheets. So this series of fact sheets helps community officials, residents, and others understand the benefits of low-impact development, green infrastructure, and sustainable design. They're intended to help communities navigate the many and sometimes complicated aspects of low-impact development and actually put them to use. They include cost breakdowns, some success stories, and answers to some frequently asked questions about low-impact development. So here are the 5 of them. The first is on valuing green infrastructure. So how saving land also saves communities water and money. Conservation design, this calls out some financial benefits and local examples of sustainable design. Low impact development techniques, this goes into the costs and benefits of 5 low impact development techniques. It also discusses site design to reduce pavement and therefore save money in communities. The 4th focuses less on values, but it provides information on how to actually implement LID in communities, focusing on bylaws and regulations that can be updated to accommodate low impact development. And then 5, urban waters. This provided a case study on stormwater low impact development in Leominster, Massachusetts. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail about this. So this is the case study in the 5th fact sheet. So it focused on Monoosnock Brook. Beginning in 2008, a series of projects were undertaken to address the sediment, nutrients, and bacteria from stormwater flowing into Monoosnock Brook and the North Nashua River. So the brook stretches 6.1 miles through the city of Leominster. So this project engaged a wide variety of stakeholders, including business owners, schools, churches. It utilized numerous low impact development best management practices, or BMPs, including bioretention areas, like you see on the right, infiltration trenches, and gravel wetlands. And the results, so pollutant loading was significantly reduced into the brook, and the project was found to be significantly less expensive compared to the cost of conventional stormwater practices. Okay, and specifically, so this project was significantly less expensive compared to how much it would have cost to remove the same amount of nitrogen and phosphorus by conventional stormwater practices. And these conventional practices were represented by dry detention basins. So using Leominster's Rockwell Pond and Lower Monoosnock projects, the Horsley-Ritten group calculated a cost comparison of conventional versus low impact development methods. So the Rockwell Pond represented a cost savings of 79% for phosphorus reduction and 85% for nitrogen reduction. Similarly, the Lower Monoosnock project, LID focused, represented a cost savings of 83% for phosphorus reduction and 69% for nitrogen reduction. And this is demonstrated in this graph. And so these fact sheets are all available at massaudubon.org/LID cost. And we also have some other information available there as well. Okay, so I'm finished talking about resources from Mass Audubon, and I'm going to move on to some resources from other partners who are doing similar work. So first, the Trust for Public Land. They've looked at return on investments of state land protection programs in over a dozen states. So these analyses have been used in educational campaigns to make the case for new or continued land conservation funding. It was released in Massachusetts in 2013, and it was initially used to advocate for the environmental bond. So I've included a link to those analyses here. I also did a previous webinar with the senior conservation economist, Jennifer Plowden, with TPL on building the case for nature. And she discussed during that webinar communicating economic values to different audiences. So for example, communities trying to meet MS4 permit standards may be interested in stormwater. Health advocates might be interested in asthma and air quality more so. Drinking water was found to almost always be at the top of the Trust for Public Lands polls, so a lot of people care about that one. Climate vulnerability and preparedness is another one that's very popular with certain local officials. However, foundations and partners may be interested in climate and carbon, but legislators and local officials are found to usually be more interested in how it will impact the bottom line. And this is why it's so helpful to quantify the benefits of nature. Okay, and this is another resource by the Trust for Public Land. So the Trust for Public Land and American Forests teamed up to create a forest carbon map that you can use to look at carbon stocks and the breakout of carbon in the forests. So that's where the carbon is stored in the soil, canopy, etc. The value of this carbon, threats to carbon stocks like development, and co-benefits of forests like water protection and habitat provisioning. And this can be useful in thinking about where conservation can have the greatest impact. And Mas Audubon also has what we call a mapper tool that similarly helps communities strategize where it is most effective and impactful to conserve land. But the Trust for Public Lands map goes into the social value of carbon as well as equivalencies. So it will express the value in vehicle miles driven and pounds of coal burned. So this is the full list of resources on conservation economics from the Trust for Public Land, their research library, the Conservation Economics website, the return on investment information, and the forest carbon map. And Jennifer is great and also welcomes any questions or comments, and there's her email and phone number. Okay, so this is the Value of Rhode Island Forest Report by the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. So this was a project of the Rhode Island Forest Conservation Advisory and the Rhode Island Tree Council. So the report goes over the current state of Rhode Island forests, the values, and how to better promote forest conservation. And the theme of the report is recognizing just how many benefits forests provide and not overlooking any of them. So here are the services that they go over in the report. They have a very robust cultural value section that focuses on Indigenous populations. So Rhode Island's forests continue to be used by Indigenous people as places to gather resources used for food, medicine, and culturally significant ceremonies. The author has interviewed a council member on the Narragansett tribe on the holistic way that tribes value forest land. They also get into how Indigenous people's relationships to the diverse lands and waters within Rhode Island have been challenged by colonial practices. And for example, it's been a challenge for members of the Narragansett tribe to access lands from which they have traditionally gathered. So involving tribal members in projects and plans that impact their traditional landscapes can help better incorporate cultural values into decision making and allow policies to reflect the cultural value of forests in addition to all of these other forest values. Okay, and then the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition Value of Protected Open Space Working Group. So this working group was created to use research on ecosystem services to support the case for land conservation. So very similar work going on with partners. The current goals are creating a partnership between the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition and regional planning authorities to distribute information on the value of nature. So they've developed a case statement to build support for this concept that they would like to share more widely. They also want to create a set of communication tools for local practitioners, and they're looking towards Massachusetts Resilient Lands Initiative for this, since there's a communications goal included in that initiative, and I'll be going over that initiative in a moment. And they're hoping to dovetail off of that. So anyone especially interested in this and learning more can contact Krista Collins at Sudbury Valley Trustees. She welcomes any feedback and questions. Okay, and as I mentioned, the Resilient Lands Initiative in Massachusetts. So this initiative is focused on developing a 10-year plan for land conservation in Massachusetts that reduces our vulnerability to climate change and builds resilience in our natural communities. So it's been a year-long process of stakeholder meetings that has led to the creation of the vision summary, which will soon be finalized. So this Resilient Lands Initiative summary describes the vision and 8 strategies we can use to implement it. And what I want to point out here is that this initiative highlights nature services, and 2 of the 8 strategies are focusing on urban green space and community health, and focusing on natural carbon storage and climate resilience. So there are 2 public listening sessions coming up on this initiative, both on August 20th, if you're interested in learning more. And then if you want to take it further and provide comments on the initiative, those are due on August 26th. And that link tells you much more about those listening sessions and how to access them. You don't have to register in advance, and how to submit comments if you want. The Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition has submitted a comment letter, and Mass Audubon will be doing the same. Okay, and then this is specifically a communications resource that is great. So this was led by MassECAN, which is the Massachusetts Ecosystem Climate Adaptation Network. And the new report is Taking Cues from Nature to Adapt to Climate Change, a communications resource for nature-based solutions. So it was, again, created through MassECAN, affiliated Mainstreaming Nature-Based Solutions Work Group and the Climate Communications Work Group, with support from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and UMass Extension Service. So the resource was written for practitioners to provide more climate adaptation and ecosystems context for nature-based solutions, and to highlight their many co-benefits for people and nature. And recently, there has been increased interest in nature-based solutions in Massachusetts, thanks to their prioritization in the MVP program, or Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. So this program in Massachusetts provides state funding to help communities prepare for the impacts of climate change. And what's great about this resource is that they describe local examples of nature-based solutions, including forest conservation, green infrastructure, and living shorelines. Okay, and then lastly, I want to talk about the Rhode Island Urban Forests for Climate and Health Initiative. So this initiative focuses on the value of urban forests for climate and health, specifically in Rhode Island. And information from this project can be used to demonstrate the importance of urban forests and encourage municipalities to plant trees where they would have the most impact. So the focus is on maximizing the benefits or services that trees provide for us. So the toolkit includes much more than this, but the tree equity score, which is going to be calculated for every block group in Rhode Island. And it's intended to help partners determine how well the tree canopy is serving their most vulnerable populations and maximizing its climate mitigation potential. Second, the Climate and Health Forestry Action Guide. So this provides guidance on setting goals and workflows, and determining gaps in a community's urban forestry management. And lastly, the planter tool. So this is really cool. It's going to be a parcel level mapping tool to help pinpoint locations where tree planting holds the most potential benefit to humans. Okay, and then here are here's my contact information and a list of the resources from Mass Audubon and the University of Rhode Island. And I know this presentation is going to be shared out So you'll have links to everything else in the presentation as well. Okay, and these are just the acknowledgements for the Narragansett Bay Watershed Economy Project. And I'm all set.
Thank you so much, Paige. This is Tess. I think our plan now is to launch into a Q&A, and we're going to go ahead and I think do our webcams for this.
Great.
Hello, everybody. So we have about 20 minutes for questions, and thank you so much to everyone that's submitted a question already. We're going to do our best to get through all of them, but please continue submitting them. Use the question dialog box and type them in. Before we get really into the meat of the questions, we can quickly just point you, so the presentation slides are going to be shared. They're going to be uploaded to the SNEP network, the website that Leah shared earlier during the introduction, and they're going to be posted as soon as possible. So in your follow-up email that you'll receive right after the webinar, there will be a link to the www.snepnetwork.org website where you're going to be able to access the slides. And for all of the resources that Paige covered, the fact sheets, you can download those right now under the handout section, which is right on the GoToWebinar control panel. Great, okay. So Paige, we're gonna just go in order here. So there's a couple questions. The first one is, does the value of nature database or other reference documents include information about the multipliers that you use to identify the value of preserved or protected lands?
So that would probably be in the methodology section. We have a description of each methodology in the beginning of the database on the first sheet. And then from there, we only list the methodology type in the database. So it doesn't include information on if multipliers were used in the paper. So that's something you would have to look for in the full studies. And we provide links to the full studies. If you don't have access to a full study and you would like to see it, you can certainly email me and I can see what I can do with that, with getting you the full paper if you're curious, more curious about the methodology.
Great. And I forgot to mention this, but there was an entire document of references that we didn't have space to upload in the handout section, but that is included in the PowerPoint presentation that you'll be able to download later. So the next question is, what are the options for translating some or all of this information so that it's useful for individual towns in their LID green infrastructure planning? I actually think this could mean two things. It could mean translate the language, or I think maybe we are talking about paring down the information and selecting bits to be relevant to different communities as well.
Yeah, I think tailoring the information to who you're trying to reach is really important, and Jennifer Plowden's presentation covered a lot of that. So that's also available online. And if you're interested in seeing that, a recording of that webinar, you can certainly email me and I'll send you the link. But yeah, it's basically like she recommended, understanding your audience first. So what needs does your community have? So are they really having a problem with meeting EPA's stormwater regulations? Is it a coastal community that's facing sea level rise and storm surge? And then what we intended for the fact sheets was that you could pick and choose information and stats quickly and hopefully easily from them, so that you don't have to necessarily send, I think it could be a lot to send a community all 5 fact sheets and not tailor any information, because it is a lot of information. 2-sided, 5 2-sided fact sheets would be a lot, and I think might be overlooked in general. So yeah, picking and choosing was the intent of the fact sheets. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and actually I think that is really relevant because there are a couple questions on, what's your advice for for tailoring a specific message for these, obviously So for example, maybe you have experienced some resistance to climate change when you're working with a particular community. Are there any particular types of that, like, what values of nature have you found really appeal to working with folks that might be resistant for whatever, for whatever reason?
Yeah, so I think with municipality, I think spreading awareness about the value of nature to organizations and regional planning agencies. I found that you don't necessarily need hard and fast stats to make your point, but I have found that, and I think I mentioned this during the presentation, that with municipalities, it is helpful, in my opinion, to have quick stats, a few of them that point out the benefits that green infrastructure will have in their community. And then we also tailor it, so if I'm talking to a conservation nonprofit, my outreach there will look a lot different than if I'm working to educate a public health organization on how it can be great to use nature to accomplish their goals as well. So yeah, again, it all kind of ties in together with tailoring the message to the audience, for sure.
Okay, and next, are you aware of any methodologies or even tools that are available to help municipalities do their own evaluation of natural assets? I know you showed us a mapper, but maybe there are some others that would be relevant.
Sure. I could probably find more resources if this person emailed me, which they can feel free to do. But one example that's coming to mind is the iTree toolkit. So this is in the urban green space fact sheet, and it allows you to value trees and urban forests, on different scales in your community. And it provides quick values for carbon capture and storage and stormwater capture. So I found that to be a really cool resource. That's the first one that's coming to mind right now. But I do know that there are others that I could definitely point this person to.
Awesome. Okay. I think that's a great place to start. And yes, if to the person who asked that question, if you want to get in touch with Paige directly, feel free. Her information will be on the PowerPoint slide, and we can also send it in our follow-up email as well. Next, our next question kind of is going back to an earlier part of the presentation, but you had mentioned the concept of willingness to pay during the part of your presentation that was the collaboration with the Stanford University on land use and water quality evaluation. Could you just remind us a little bit about what that term means and how it's helpful for understanding, economic value?
Sure. Yeah, so willingness to pay is frequently used as a metric in these different ecosystem service valuation studies. So willingness to pay, or WTP, is essentially the maximum amount that a person is willing to pay for a product or service like water quality. So for example, in this Stanford study, the model predicted willingness to pay using a water quality index, which measured the condition of the bay based on the presence of 6 pollutants. So that's a very high level description of willingness to pay. But yeah, how much is someone willing to pay for this service?
Yeah. And I think, the discussion of methodology so far, there are so many types of methodology, and sometimes people will just even measure it by going up and asking you, how much would you, like, how much would you pay to come visit this park again? Or, things like that. So it can get so complicated so quickly, which is why it's so useful that you've compiled all of this for us so that we don't have to do it.
Yeah, there are quite a few. I think in the database there are maybe 10 different methodologies that are used, and all quite different. I feel like benefit transfer came up the most, which is the transfer of values from an ecosystem service valuation in one area to another area. So that kind of, I think, addresses the question of also like the multipliers. So that's where you would see that method being used.
Awesome. And then this is another sort of particular question. Well, it references a part of your presentation somewhat specifically, but the losing ground report that you worked on with Mass Audubon. So it found that a quarter of the new development was going to on the ground solar, and the recommendation was getting solar off the ground, which is a very clever way of putting that. But what are some of the designs that that really, what designs are being referenced here when you mean getting solar off the ground? And does it mean more roof mounted solar panels, or are there other options for larger solar development that we may not be able to visualize off the top of our head?
Yeah, I think mainly what we're referring to there is rooftop solar as the main one, like over parking lots and solar canopies. Yeah, so on top of buildings, on top of parking lots. So we have a couple of examples in the report of what we mean by that, but those are the two main types we're referring to.
Awesome. Great. Okay. And then lastly, and this, there's a lot to say about this topic, but maybe you have some advice. We do have plenty of time for more questions if others want to submit them, but you do a lot of outreach, and these tools that you've shared and the fact sheets that you've shared are intended to be used as outreach tools. Do you have any advice for outreach, given that in-person outreach opportunities have been limited and with COVID, and it's gotten harder to go out and work in communities the way we used to? Do you have any advice for how folks can take some of these fact sheets and run with them?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. What I found useful at Mass Audubon is really tapping into partnerships and even creating new partnerships when I can in outreach. So, how I know about the other resources that I listed in the PowerPoint was just because we've partnered with those organizations before, and I could tap into their knowledge as well and include even more information in my outreach rather than just presenting what Mass Audubon has done, which is the database and the fact sheets. So for example, with the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership that we are a partner for, they're a regional conservation partnership, and they're doing outreach for that Value of Rhode Island Forest report that I spoke about. So we are kind of trying to combine outreach, so incorporating their report into my outreach, and then also incorporating our forest fact sheet in their outreach as well. So it's just trying to maximize the impact as much as possible, because it is definitely harder with COVID to reach as many people. But also I've seen some benefits too, like with webinars, you can sometimes reach more people because it's cutting down on logistics and all that. But yeah, that would be my
interesting to see, since we often think of the digital divide, but in some ways maybe the gap is people are forcibly adapting. So I guess we are finding out as we speak.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm seeing that looks like we've covered most of the questions. So there's a couple more housekeeping items to take care of before we start to close up for the day. When we close out the webinar, you're going to get a survey. It's going to show up when we close out. So if you value these webinars and would like to give us some feedback, please take the survey. Oh, we have one more request. Paige, would you mind sharing your contact information again on your presentation?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me pull that up.
And we'll have Paige's information up one more time as she gets that ready for all of you.
Okay. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I can leave that up too.
Awesome. And if just a last reminder to keep the SNP network in mind if you have technical assistance needs. If you could use a little help unpacking some of these issues or some of the fact sheets or tools, that's something that if you were to get in touch with Paige directly or even go through our website, that's some technical assistance that we could certainly offer. And on that note, I'd love to turn it back over to you, Paige, if you have any closing comments.
Yeah, not too much. Thank you so much for having me. And again, please, if you have any questions about any of this, I know this was a lot of information and there are a lot of resources that I mentioned. Please feel free to reach out about anything. Yeah, happy to talk about any of this more. But yeah, thank you for joining.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Leah, for getting us started. And Paige, thank you. It really was such an information-packed presentation. We're looking forward to sharing it.
Thanks.
All right, have a great afternoon, everybody.
Okay, bye.